Oi waira te one tapu ka hura tangata auta te tūraki atu ki tangata atai, ka hura tangata atai te tūraki atu ki tangata auta. Pērā hoki rā te kōrepe nui, te kōrepe roa, te wāhia wa te toi toi a wa whakamaua tamaki te ara, whakamoe tamaki te ara no tū norongo whano, whano haramai te toki, haumi e, hui e, tāiki e. E te marea, nau mai, haere mai, whakatau mai ki te poho o te whakaaro, a te poho o te kōrero, te poho o te rangahau, tēnei e mihi kau ake nei. Ki ngā mate huhua o te wā, haere hoki atu, kia tātou ngā kano hiora, rarau mai nei, ngā mātāwa ka putanua, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. E tupu e rea mo ngā rā o tō ao, tō ringa ki ngā rākau a te Pākehā, hei oranga mo tō tinana. Tō ngā kau ki ngā taonga ao tūpuna, Māori hei tiki tiki mo tō mātenga. O tō wairua ki tō atua, nāna nei ngā mea katoa I hanga. Tā apira nangata. Nau mai, haere mai, and welcome to this week's webinar, The Digital Dilemma, the Promise, the Challenge and the Mental Wellbeing of Our Children. With a better start, e tipu e rea, the National Science Challenge, Cure Kids and the Paediatric Society of New Zealand, looking at the potential gains and pitfalls in using technology to support mental well-being and resilience in our children and young people. My name is Kawati Waitford, and it's a pleasure to facilitate this webinar today. The National Science Challenge works to help children, teenagers, and their whānau achieve the best possible start in life. Our researchers work with communities, drawing together Indigenous and Western approaches to find practical, evidence-based solutions to health, well-being, and learning issues. Our mission is to make a measurable difference for tamariki, improving potential for all young New Zealanders to have a healthy weight, good literacy skills, and sound mental health. There's so much terrific research going on and some groundbreaking projects happening. It's important for us to share our knowledge and progress with the research community and the people our work directly impacts. And it's a good chance for you to ask questions of the researchers themselves. You'll note that you're muted, however, the webinar will end with a Q&A session, so please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A function of your Zoom window, upvote questions submitted by other attendees, and our team will endeavour to field those questions to our speakers. A bit of housekeeping. Today's webinar is scheduled for just over an hour, including Q&A. It will also be recorded and made available to attendees following its conclusion. Please share your thoughts on today's webinar in our short survey. We'll be sharing the link towards the end of the session. And so without further ado, our exciting lineup of presenters today are Professor Dali Mary, Dr. Terry Fleming, Dr. Karolina Stasiak, Dr. Esther Cowley-Malcolm, Sam Rodney Hudson, Associate Professor Dione Healy, with Cure Kids Research Director Tara Satyanand as Chair. So without further ado, I'd like to now hand over to Professor Sally. Sally, are you there?
I am indeed. Tēnā koe, thank you for your greeting for this exciting webinar. We're very pleased to have this set of talks coming up, sponsored by Cure Kids, by the Paediatric Society, and by the National Science Challenge, E Tipu e Rea, off to a better start. And I think I would like to just start by acknowledging that we're talking about digital dilemma, and I think we've been through really a very, very difficult year, and it continues to be difficult. 2020 has been really an unexpected challenge internationally, and although we've fared better in New Zealand than many places have, all the same, we're feeling the ripple effects of the COVID pandemic. Families have been dealing with multiple issues, including working from home, trying to run homeschooling, dealing with the anxiety of potential of infection. Some people have, of course, been infected, and some people have lost loved ones. Many of us are separated from dear people who live overseas, and we feel like we've just suddenly been cut off from being able to visit them or have them visit us. So it's a time of difficulty and challenge, and I think it's probably a year in which we have used technology more than ever before. I have never spent so many hours on Zoom as I have this year, and I'm quite an enthusiastic user of Zoom. So we see some major benefits from the potential use of technology, and we will be talking more about those. But I think it would not be right to start this webinar without also acknowledging some of the concerns people have We know about cyberbullying. We know about excessive screen use and how it is not of benefit to children and young people, that it reduces the ability to do outside exercise and so on. And yet it has also been provided them with an opportunity to stay connected with their friends and with their teachers and with other family members at a time when they haven't been able to move around. And it must be a particularly important tool for those overseas who are facing further lockdowns and further rising in COVID cases. So that's with an acknowledgement of some of the limitations of technology, but I think things are always a two-edged sword, and there's a very classic quote about the concerns about the use of novels in the 1700s, and people were talking about people becoming addicted to novels, especially young women, and how dangerous this was going to be to their mental health. And it seems worth a bit of a wry smile these days, but you know, that those concerns have gone. And I think we can use technology, and we can use the ability to tap in and try to use it wisely. And I think we're going to see a bit of a swing in the pendulum both ways. I think one of the things that we do know is that the pandemic is increasing the mental health problems in young people, and there is evidence that that has been climbing, partly related to family stress and partly related to the social isolation that they have faced. And so in this seminar, we're actually going to start with Terry, who's actually going to talk about the current mental health problems within young people. And then we're going to move through a panel of Carolina. I'm going to talk on behalf of Tanya Kaga, who couldn't join us today, Esther, Sam, and Dione. And we're going to tell you about some practical things that you can use here and now that are potentially useful for young people in Aotearoa. So over to Terry to start.
Kia ora tātou, very lovely to connect with you. We can't see your faces, attendees, but I've had a little look and seen some wonderful friends on the name list and some people I don't know. So a very warm welcome to you all. My name is Terry Fleming, Dr. Terry Fleming. I co-lead the Rangatahi, Youth 19 Rangatahi Smart Survey, which is the latest in the Youth 2000 series. And I'm sharing a little bit about that with you. Catherine, my screen is not clicking through. And I just wonder if it's just a bit slow or if you can do the next slide for me. Hang on. Yes, we're there. Now we've done 2 slides. Here we are. So, presenting some findings from Youth 2000 series. Youth 2000 series has been going for nearly 20 years now. Sally and myself are among the original members of the crew. Now Associate Professor Terry Ann Clark from the University of Auckland is the Māori lead and co-leads with me, and I'm at Victoria University of Wellington these days. We have colleagues from other universities who are part of the program, and over this period of time, we've surveyed over 36,000 high school students. This is 2019 data though, so what I'm going to show you is consistent with trends in Western developed nations of essentially increased mental health need before even COVID, and just acknowledging that COVID has distinctly increased the stress. And there are some studies saying it increases the disorder, but certainly many saying it increases the stress. So the survey asks about lots of issues in health and wellbeing, and some of it is really good news actually. So 93% of New Zealand high school students in the latest sample say that at least one parent or person who acts as a parent cares about them a lot. They're high, it's stable, and it's probably, well, it is the single biggest predictor of young people's health and wellbeing. So some good news. In school, lots of young people feeling part of school, and some really big gains in areas of adolescent health over the period of time. So if you can see that graph, that first one there starts off talking about cigarette use. Back in 2001, about 15% of students reported weekly cigarette use, and big drops to 8, 4, and most recently under 3% 8%. So some really big gains there, not quite as dramatic, but still really important on a population level. Some gains in binge drinking, some big gains in driving dangerously, and so on. So those are just examples, but we also have seen some gains in measures of violence and other kinds of risk behaviour. So the reason I show those in this context about mental health is just really highlighting that we can and have changed things positively in a range of areas. So symptoms of depression is not like that. Here we are looking at the Reynolds score on the Reynolds Adolescent Depression Scale, so indicating that people have problematic levels of symptoms which are probably impacting on their lives day to day and would probably benefit from some treatment. So back in 2001, about 9% of males, dropping down a bit, and then this big gain in the most recent period of time. Similar for females. That is a really significant shift and almost doubling, and we are seeing that in a lot of countries and for a lot of measures. So we have also looked at that for different ethnic groups and different deprivation groups, and there are major inequities within that. So this graph is showing you with the red line that distress has increased markedly for Pākehā or European people, from almost doubling there. And then we have had a major increase in disparity or inequity, where the groups were more similar in those middle years and have separated out again. And we are particularly seeing these very high rates of distress, 38% of young Māori women indicating that on this measure. It's about 40% of young Pacific women, and similarly high for Asian young women. There's an inequity effect around gender diversity, sexual diversity, and deprivation as well. I won't go into the details here because I'm aware we've got lots to do in the timing, but just to acknowledge that suicide attempts also really problematic, and we have 12% of Māori young people, nearly 13%, reporting that they have attempted suicide in the last year. This is of high school students who are there on the day. So actually, if anything, it's a healthy picture. Deprivation indicators here. So in the lower deprivation, i.e. the wealthier communities, there's your depression rates, and nearly double in the higher deprivation communities, even bigger disparity when we're talking about suicide attempts. So just one little slide here to show you we're not the only people finding this. This is from the New Zealand Health Survey, looking at the same time period, measures of distress on K10, adults increasing distress, young adults very rapidly increasing distress. So lots of work about why. There's no single simple answer, but people talk about aspects affecting early development and the continued and exacerbating effects of colonisation and racism, and structural determinants of health inequities and so on. Contemporary factors like exposure to social media and the kind of doomer hypothesis, or the why wouldn't we be depressed? You look at the world that we're facing kind of story. So we also asked young people their views about what were the biggest problems. They did highlight mental health as one of those. This is in a sort of open text question, just under 3,000 young people answering that. And what they wanted to change was updating school, supporting us, which included mental health services, but also families and communities, and the big picture stuff about saving our future. How can we be happy when we are looking at climate change, job insecurity, housing insecurity, and now the impact of COVID. Sorry, so just some examples here. Young Māori women saying better access and support for people who have mental health and identity issues, whether they're very serious or not as serious. So not just mental health, but these broader identity issues, cultural belonging, and so on. And quite a lot about the planet. Please do more than discuss global warming, actually do something. We don't want to live on a dust bowl scattered with skeletons. Quite a lot of young people kind of do the big picture as well as the smaller stuff. My final slide, there's lots more information on our website, and this very clear measure message from young people that they do want more mental health supports, also supports in a broader community way, and the big picture changes too. Thank you. Carolina, I believe.
Kia ora tātou. Let's see if I can navigate the slides. Oh, it was easier before. Yep, there we go. Oops, same thing as before. Sorry about that. So I want to bring start by highlighting the work we've been doing on Sparks. And I would hope that by now most of people on the in the audience have heard about Sparks. I have been very privileged to have sort of worked on Sparks from its very infancy, from the sort of humble beginnings of my PhD project. Professor Sally Mary and Terry Fleming, also on the panel, have sort of led the work. It's sort of came as an idea to develop a kind of a computerized e-therapy into a serious game. And while it was a wild idea, it actually worked well, and it's been funded by the Ministry of Health. Designed to sort of consist of 7 modules, which kind of sort of mimics the traditional way we would deliver counselling or therapy with core CBT strategies. Having done a robust trial and having been featured on the cover of BMJ, we've actually gone quite a few steps further, which is unusual for a lot of research. We've actually sort of jumped the implementation cliff and implemented it nationally with the funding of Ministry of Health under the auspices of the Prime Minister's Youth Mental Health Initiative. So in 2014, Sparks went online, and since then, in the last 6 years, has been accessed by more than 30,000 New Zealanders. We collect data as people go through Sparks, and we know that those who complete at least half of the intervention get better. And I guess it may become a sort of a theme later on as we continue with the panel, engagement is complicated outside of trials. In the real life, I guess engagement is based on how well we feature in the sort of crowded space of lots of things that are on social media and YouTube. So what we're seeing is that it's better when a young person is supported through Sparks and through other self-help management. So speaking to people who might be in the audience today who are working with rangatahi in the mental health space, it is important that they are supported and encouraged along the way. Now, we have also responded to the sort of rapidly changing landscape of technology. So this is not something that you develop once and you put on a shelf. You've got to be agile. We've done some things like update the website, optimize, create an app. If we go back to 2009 when Spark started, it was a CD-ROM designed for low-spec computers, and now we've got an app version. We are kind of responding to feedback from users in terms of improving graphics and gameplay, and there's some exciting work going on to kind of go even further. Now we haven't sort of rested on our laurels. There's been a lot more work going on. The kind of buzzword is an ecosystem, which is essentially a system of digital health interventions that sort of function as a whole. So, sorry about that. So we've got a number of different interventions that we've learned from Sparks, for example, about how to design specifically for apps. We've got Questa Whirianga, and this is under the first tranche of Habits 1. Questa Whirianga has been co-designed with young people, designed to be gamified, so it's still quite playful and quite sort of engaging, but instead of long 20-30 minute sessions, we've kind of chunked it into 2-3 minutes kind of snacktivity, and it's designed to sort of boost a young person's well-being, still delivering core CBT, IPT, positive psychology skills such as gratitude. We've got something else as well that we're working on for older adolescents. It's called Headstrong. It is a chatbot. You may have interacted on with a chatbot on a customer service website. Our chatbot is designed as a personal trainer for your mind. So it consists of daily chats, again, thinking about how young people engage with technology in a sort of short bursts of time. And so you choose a persona, Aroha, Olivia, Manaya, or Ravi, and you have daily conversations, you choose your activity. Once again, core evidence-based strategies, but also at the request of young people, we've got things like humor, motivational messages, mini games, and again, we reward them with a sort of a sense of kind of progress badges and things like that. Now, what are we going to do with all this? We've actually got a lot more, many more tools that we have developed ourselves. We've got a platform that allows us to connect our resources, our tools that we develop in-house, but also we can take third-party tools and connect them with the platform. The platform allows us to provide access, rapid access to trials, so we can actually measure things. We can collect data. We don't have to rely on paper questionnaires or research assistants. Everything happens within the ecosystem. And the next step for us is to actually take it into schools and see how well the system as a whole performs. So what we know already from a number of research, this is a very active research domain, that individually the digital tools tend to work well. But what we are interested in finding out is how well we can introduce it to a school system. How is it going to be perceived by all the different stakeholders? What do young people think about it? What do whānau think? Importantly, do they get better? And also we're looking at things like measuring long-term outcomes together alongside with IDI, kind of in the long term. Now, I also want to highlight this tool. If we think about Sparks, how many years it's taken to develop it and how long it's taken to implement it, we've actually learned to be a lot more agile, and our platform allows us to do that. Over the first weekend of lockdown 1, Tanya Cargo and Sarah Headstrong created a chatbot to support young people through COVID-related stress. So this is delivering youth-friendly strategies and tips for managing your anxiety and your worries and being disconnected and away from school, away from friends. It allows us, the system that we've got allows us to be iterative, so we can move between alert levels and adjust content. And also we've got some extra funding as well to provide, to sort of do ongoing IT enhancements, and really excitingly, also a version of Te Reo Aroha that will recognize Te Reo language. So I think that takes me, Sally, on to your part, and I think I'm navigating for you.
Yes, that's right. Thanks, Carolina. As part of the Habits platform, it's not just targeted for young people. We've actually seen this as being a go-to place for people in Aotearoa from all walks of life, for parents, for those who support young people, for parents of adolescents and parents of young children. And Esther and I are going to talk to you about 2 studies that have been funded by Cure Kids. So we've had this lovely partnership between funding from a Better Start National Science Challenge and from Cure Kids that has allowed us to do something that we would never have been able to do on an individual research study. So we've been targeting parents of preschoolers, and we've got 2 interventions that we're going to talk about, Play Kindly and Super Kids. Next slide, Carolina. And I just want to highlight that we're thinking about tools that you can use now, and we have a clinical trial, and we are recruiting now for parents of preschoolers who have children whose behavior is worrying them. It's available nationally online. There's a 3-way randomization, and everybody gets both apps by the end. Some people are randomized to wait for a week, and it's like a 5-day parenting challenge. Assessments are done online. They're very short, under 5 minutes, and all participants go into a weekly draw to a $150 voucher. And I actually saw Martinez, who's overseeing this whole trial, and he was just about to go off and post the first lot of vouchers out today. Next slide. So Super Kids is based on parent-child interaction therapy. This is one of the most evidence-based, or this is one of the strongest supported interventions for parents of preschoolers. It's been shown to reduce disruptive behavior and to actually reduce parents getting to their wits' end and using corporal punishment. And it's normally delivered in a clinic in face-to-face therapy, a bit like the Super Nanny. but with a lot of emphasis on building positive relationships between children and their parents. And that is the core of it. And then that's followed by effective ways of setting limits. Now, in the current version of Super Kids, we're focusing on the positive relationship with parents, and it was developed by Tanya Kago, who's a very experienced Maori clinical psychologist, and Chia Yumoto, who has extensive experience with also a clinical psychologist with working with this very young age group. And they're both certified PCIT practitioners. And they've taken some of those core principles and put it into Super Kids. And the sort of byline for that is 5 minutes of play for Super Kids all day. And it gives a kind of real life coaching in the home using an app. And I think that we're really looking for people to try that out right now. Next slide. And I'm now going to hand over to Esther, who has been collaborating with our research team. And this has been I guess, a community Pacifica researcher collaboration, although Esther's a researcher in her own right, that has been very precious to our team. So over to you, Esther.
Thanks, Sally. Kia ora meira tātou katoa, tālofa lava. I'll be talking about the Play Kindly Act, how it all began and to where we are at now. Next slide. The idea for a parenting program for New Zealand-born Pacific parents originated from my doctoral research, where I trialled a CD-ROM called Play Nicely with Samoan parents in Tokoroa in the South Waikato. And Professor Seth Scholler and colleagues at Vanderbilt University in the USA produced this program. And it supports teachers and parents in the management of aggressive behaviour in young children, and teaches them the basics of how to manage hurtful behaviour. And Play Kindly was modelled off Play Nicely, but is a totally different look to the CD-ROM with its Pacific flavour. Next slide. After I completed my doctoral research, I was awarded the Loxley Award by Quaker Peace and Service, which enabled me to fund the initial Play Kindly app. And our original team comprised of Ali Cowley, who is an animator, and Oscar Kitely, who is a playwright and also a producer of movies and a bit of a comedian, and myself. And I was really privileged to have these two guys on board. Ali did all the animation. He was also an animator for Brotown, and many of you will know who Oscar Kitely is. Next slide. So what is Play Kindly? Well, it's everything you can read on the screen there. It's a gamified animated app. It's designed to help people respond appropriately and effectively to common behaviours in children. It's designed to appeal to Pacific peoples and to the majority who are New Zealand-born Pacific parents. It's the first app of its kind in Aotearoa, and that's really exciting for us. It's an interactive cross-platform computer game and can be downloaded for use on a smartphone. And it uses real-life scenarios and teaches evidence-based behavioural strategies. Next slide. The revised version is a very improved app from a lot of feedback that we've had from clinicians and other professionals dealing with children and their behaviour, and also from parents and young people. It's much more polished and has a really seamless flow to it. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, I can't take you through each of the scenarios, but at the beginning, it has 2 scenarios that depict positive interactions with parents during child-led play, and the second illustrates positive reinforcement. The scenarios that follow depict children behaving aggressively to their siblings and parents, and these are scenarios that most parents will be familiar with or can relate to. For example, fighting over a toy or hitting another sibling, etc. And once the scenarios is viewed, you choose out of 3 the most appropriate answer, and if correct, you move on to the next scenario. And the correct and incorrect answers have explanations as to why when you've selected them. So we have a coach S and a coach OS who will give you those explanations. Slide 6 next. So where we are right now is at the recruitment phase, as Sally was saying, of the trial. And if you know parents of young children aged 2 to 6 years, our research team would really appreciate hearing from you. And you can contact Martinez on m.becker@auckland.ac.nz. So that's the end of my presentation. That's a very, very brief overview of Play Kindly. Thank you for listening. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa, whawhitai tele lava. Thank you for listening. And I'd now like to pass over to Sam.
Kia ora. Thank you so much, Esther and Sally and others. So interesting. I will attempt to use my mouse and take us to the next screen. My name's Sam Rodney Hudson and I work for Melon Health. And today I have some slides to show you through some youth resources that we had been developing before the COVID response, and were able to pull together something pretty rapidly through the wellbeing tools requirement in terms of that digital support and the Ministry of Health's response to the needs during lockdown. I'm joined today by Siobhan Bolfin, and she and I can take any questions that you might have about the presentation. We're an organisation based in Wellington, and our whole purpose is to connect and empower people struggling with their health. And that can be a number of different long-term conditions. Obviously acknowledging that emotional wellness, mental health plays a really big part in that. But we really do try to focus on whole person and holistic support. We have been doing that since 2012. And really looking at self-awareness, education, human support. And over that time have supported over 30,000 people with 12 long-term conditions that we have ticked in our programs, but obviously many more. And our focus is really to integrate with primary care, and that has extended to education in terms of those youth and wellbeing resources. So we have, and I will show you this at the end of the presentation, an online community with resources and a health journal that you can join, and it is device agnostic, so you can use it across different devices. But we, having done a lot of research over the last couple of years, there isn't an appetite for that in the under 18s, and so we felt that a open website with resources that can be used in a supported manner by counsellors or wellbeing staff within schools, or indeed teachers, would potentially be the best way to go for these youth resources. In order to develop these different resources, we utilise data from 2 years of our emotional wellness program of people favoriting, saving, and how much they watched different resources and different topics. And some of those were tips and tools on creating habits, others on what we can control and what we can't control. And I'll have a slide that gives us a bit more information about that in a moment. So the website that we have developed is called the Melon Manual, and we have lots of different subsections within that, and people just sort of click through, and it's optimized for mobile, but it is a browser accessed. So these are different elements that people go through to access different resources. To try and infiltrate the normal channels that people are using, like social media and especially YouTube, within this population of sort of 13 to 18, we created 8 different videos, animations that were based on the data that we had looked at in terms of those wellbeing tools used by different people. I'm unfortunately unable to play those today, but if you go to the Mellon manual, you can see all of those peppered throughout those pages. And if you are in the age group of 18 to 24, you may well have seen these as ads over the last 3 to 4 months. They have been viewed in their entirety more than 1 million times. And we all know that we can skip an ad pretty quickly. And we've had responses from people just acknowledging how refreshing it is to have something that just gave them a couple of tips. I mean, these are anything from 38 seconds to 52 seconds tips on managing your well-being. They're from anything from breathing exercises to concepts around psychological flexibility, acceptance. So we chose to run those ads as a way to just give people those tips in other places. There was a link to the Mellon manual that, yes, there are stats around that being used, but it was small in comparison to the number of people that watched the actual videos.
Sometimes we all feel anxious.
So this is a list of some of those. So in terms of grounding exercises, again, we had to play a lot with the terminology and the language. Me being a nurse, sorry about that. Me being a nurse, I had to be schooled by those in comms. And obviously I was really looking at things like grounding exercises, but we found that sort of strengths-based, so being calm, got more clicks and people watched that for longer. Things like surfing the urge, so sort of creating habits and things like what I can control and can't control. A thought is just a thought. And really just this trial and error, exploratory way of managing your well-being was the thing that we found worked the most with this particular age group. The rest of the Mellon manual, and I won't go into it too much in the interest of time, but please feel free to follow that link. In fact, if you just Google Mellon manual, you will find that. In conjunction with Journey to Wellness, a counsellor and mental health advocate, Bex, who's based in Nelson, we created these images and some very sort of CBT-based tips and tools. An anxiety management set of videos, and many stories around people's lived experience of poor well-being, feeling really like they're struggling, and then some hopeful messages and things that they used to support themselves from those times. Sorry. We also found that people wanted podcasts, and so we have a podcast, and we've supported Rangatahi to create their own podcasts, and we work through them and mentor them in how those podcasts are edited and put out to the public. So again, those are lived experience stories by those people for the age group of 13 to 24. And for parents that may require some support, we have our community. So in order to find that, you can come to the Mellon website, and it navigates you straight to a community, and that's the direct to consumer. You get a health journal. We use the OARS, the outcomes rating scale, to give us a sense of where people are at on a weekly basis, and those people obviously answer that weekly. And other resources. And the community is used a lot within this program, people supporting each other in informal peer support relationships. So I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of this webinar. And kia ora, thank you. I think I'm now passing over to Dione Healy.
Kia ora koutou, thank you. I'll try to see if I can get these slides to move on my screen. Ah, there you go. So I'm going to talk today about an early intervention program that I've developed that's focused on fostering the development of self-regulation in preschool age children. It's not actually based online currently, although we have been looking into some options of moving it into an online space. But currently the focus is really on directive play with children, and the idea is born very much out of the extensive research that shows that poor self-regulation in early childhood, preschool age, is a very strong predictor of outcomes over time, with poor self-regulation related to adverse outcomes across a wide array of areas, including mental health. And so the idea is that if you can foster good self-regulation, you can hopefully build resilience in young children moving forward. So this is a 10-week play-based program. We've done trials on 2 versions of the program. So one has been family-based with parents and children, and one is school-based, mostly so far focused on early childhood education centres. And the main idea around Engage, I've tried to keep it very simple. So the philosophy, if that's the right word, is that it's building skills through play is essentially what we're doing. And we're trying to build these skills slowly over time. So I'll go through some examples of the games in a minute, but really what I always say to people is it's not the games per se that are important, but the idea behind the game. So you're thinking about skills that you want to develop or build in children and doing that through play. So finding a game that involves that skill. And then really importantly, with the word engagement has kind of been mentioned a few times, so to get kids engaged and excited about playing the games, it's really important to make sure that they're fun, but also that they're aimed at a level where they're just slightly challenging for the child, but still doable, and there's lots of reward involved. So you're always aiming just slightly above the current skill level and consistently increasing complexity over time so that you're building the skill over time. And the idea is that the more you play, the better. In the work that we've done so far, we've encouraged 30 minutes a day spent playing various games, not just one game, but a selection of the games, although we haven't tested really whether there's a specific amount of time that you should spend. So when I conceptualize self-regulation, I look at it within 3 main areas of regulation. So you need to be able to regulate your behavior, so your impulsivity and how you respond in situations. You need to regulate your cognition, so your ability to focus and concentrate, remember things, and you need to regulate your emotions. And so here are some examples of the types of games that we play, targeting each of the areas, although obviously there's quite a lot of overlap. So I'll give a couple of examples just in the interest of time. So one of the games that involves attention and impulse control would be something like Copy Me. So you can start very simply with a basic sequence like touch your forehead, your nose and your chin. The child has to watch you, remember that, and then execute the same thing. Or various things like musical statues, Simon Says. So those are all focusing on impulsivity as an example area. Another one, if you're wanting to look at attention and memory, varying puzzles, ball games, memory games, sorting cards in different ways and remembering rules around how they're supposed to sort the cards according to varying rules. There's a game called We Went to the Park where you keep adding on something else that you did at the park. So we went on the swing and the next person has to say we went on the swing and the slide, etc. And so you're just sort of extending attention and memory. Emotional skills, so we're doing general stuff around relaxation, deep breathing, child-friendly exercises. So, for example, for progressive muscle relaxation or learning to tense and relax, we'll do wee scripts, like you have to march really stiff like a soldier, and then you're a tree blowing in the wind, so you're tensing and relaxing your muscles. So we've done a few trials on this work. So initially started, I'm a clinical psychologist, so my work was more really at-risk children, parent-child work. So that's where I began my work in this area. We did an open trial where that was the initial one, just to see whether it works. Do people do it or not? And I'll go through the results in the next slide. Then I got funding from the Health Research Council of New Zealand, and we compared Engage to Triple P, which is a positive parenting program, kind of gold standard behaviour management program. And we actually found that the two programs were equal across all of our measures. So Engage was as effective as Triple P in fostering the development of self-regulation. And then I actually, very briefly, I got contacted actually by the Methodist Mission, and so I've worked really closely with them in partnership around introducing Engage into the early childhood setting. And we've had some really good success there. So we got funding from the Tyndall Foundation and worked with about 800 children up in Auckland and across 28 kindergartens. And we're about to start another big trial in early childhood centres with Best Start early childhood centres. And we've done a few small trials sort of starting to integrate it into new entrant classes in primary school. But essentially what we found is, so there's that issue again around engagement, which we're always interested in because we can develop all sorts of wonderful programs, but if no one can actually complete them or wants to do them, then you don't get anywhere. So excitingly, we found really high engagement, really high compliance. Parents and educators enjoyed doing it. It was easy to administer because you're just kind of playing games. And actually, we thought a lot of work would need to happen around children and getting children to play and engage, but actually they find it really fun and they seem to love it. So we haven't had much problems in as far as compliance goes. I've measured, one of the key measures that I've used for measuring self-regulation across the three areas has been a measure called the BASC. So hyperactivity is looking at behavioural regulation, aggression more the emotion regulation, and attention is looking at that cognitive regulation. And we found significant reductions in ratings for children. In all of our trials, except for the initial open trial, we had a wait list. So we found very little change in behaviour during the wait list period, and then significant improvements in these areas during the active treatment period. And another really important part around intervention is maintenance. So we'll often find that people will have significant gains post-intervention, but then over time that sort of things reduce. But we've been able to consistently maintain gains up to 12 months post-intervention. So yeah, we're really excited about the work. It's always early days, but it's showing promise. It's translated easily into early childhood and primary education settings. And the new randomised controlled trial we're about to start will have more of a long-term focus with the idea to see whether does this actually play out as improved functioning over time. Great, so that is me really quickly. So I'll hand back to Tara, the chair.
Kia ora tātou. So I'm Tara Satyanand. I'm very proud to be here on behalf of the team at Cure Kids. And first of all, thank you to A Better Start for enabling these webinars, and the Paediatric Society also has been involved in setting these up. Thank you to all the presenters for the work that you've talked about today, and also for all the mahi over the years, because this is a very impressive body of work. So first we heard from Dr. Terry Fleming, and that was really about understanding the problem and the issues and listening to our rangatahi. There have been some questions that were asked, and there were some quite perceptive questions about how this research in the context of international research and what might explain some of the changes. So I wonder, Terry, if you'd like to just describe for everybody just your answers to some of those questions.
Kia ora, everyone. Those are really important questions, and there's lots of great brains all over the world unpacking that. The thing we know is it's not one single answer. Social media does not explain all the changes, neither does reduction in risk behaviour. So it looks like we've got, I guess, as we'd probably expect, a complex situation where long-term intergenerational issues that we've known about for a long time and haven't actually addressed fully yet, like racism and discrimination and inequity, have continued. Social media exacerbates worries and allows people to experience them all day, every day. And we have trained young people to think hard about their future, and we've told them how worrying that is and put a lot of pressure around that. So there is no single answer. It is an international phenomenon, and we need to keep addressing it on multiple levels. There will not be one approach that fixes all of those things.
Thank you. And in terms of responses to these challenges, Dr. Stasiak presented next on some of this ecosystem of interventions. I love that term, and it really is, you know, a huge array of different tools that you've produced to respond to these issues. And there were also some really good questions there about how these have been implemented, and things like how have these been, how have you chosen tools to adapt from overseas based on results there from different ethnic groups, and how you've adapted these for ethnic groups such as Māori in New Zealand. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Kia ora. So the tools that I spoke of specifically, we've actually taken care to develop them locally, because we know from feedback from young people that it really matters that they feel that they are local, that they respond to the needs of young people. Young people want to see themselves reflected in those, and often importing tools is simple, but then you've got to do quite a lot of work. We've done the opposite with things like Sparks. We've actually successfully taken it overseas, and our collaborators have managed to take them and sort of adapt them. And there's work has been done in Japan, also in Nunavut with First Nations Canadian people. So that's quite exciting. I don't know, Sally, if you want to comment about the usefulness or the effectiveness of PCIT and sort of strategies that have been taken from overseas and used in Aotearoa.
Yeah, so I'll comment, and then I'll let Esther talk about Play Nicely, Play Kindly. But PCIT is part of a suite of tools that includes Incredible Years and Triple P, and all of these things have actually got underlying them what are probably really universal things, which is that kids do better if they're warmly attached to their parents and if they have some limits set. And the way in which that's done is done in different ways in different cultures, but the underlying principles are there. There'd been a huge amount of research on the parenting programs that PCIT belongs to, including in Native American populations, but across countries, and then very big studies to show that it translates very well across different cultures. The choice to study and to develop super kids here was actually made by Tanya Kago, who is Māori and who had used it successfully, and she's just submitted her thesis looking at the effectiveness of PCIT in whānau that are facing really some of the major challenges in this country. So that's that lot. And Es, would you like to talk about the work with Play Kindly and Play Nicely? You need to unmute. Es, you need to unmute. Esther, you need to unmute.
Okay. I worked with Samoan parents in Tokoroa around the Play Nicely CD-ROM, and the feedback that we got from those parents were that they wanted something that was more kind of Pacific focused, but they also learnt a lot from the CD-ROM. So when we decided to look at Play Kindly, we really wanted to relate to Pacific people. So of course the humour came into it, and the animation and the fun and all those aspects of Pacific culture that we wanted in the Play Kindly app. So I think there are some universal themes that, that we use from overseas that are very applicable to Samoan culture and Pacific cultures here in New Zealand as well. And the Play Kindly app is targeting that 60% of Pacific parents who are born in New Zealand, who are very techno-savvy, who are much more aligned with New Zealand culture, or the culture of the way of life in New Zealand, I guess, but are also very connected to their Pacific cultures as well.
Kia ora, Esther. The most amazing kōrero has come out of today, and it's been such a pleasure to be a fly on the wall. Just before I wrap up, I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you all for your time and your expertise and your knowledge to share with the amazing community that's doing this amazing work. Tara, if you don't have any final words, I might just wrap up. Unless you wanted to say something.
Can I say something just before Tara, Kawati? We have had a question from Kahu, which I think is an important one to answer, saying it would be lovely to hear from Tanya next time. I couldn't agree more. Tanya was actually part of the panel and was all lined up to do this. And then on the weekend, something has come up, so she hasn't been able to be part of this. So she asked me if I would just present her slides for her. So apologies from Tanya, she would have liked to be here. Thank you. Tara.
Well, thank you. Well, just to say that thank you for all the research you've presented today, and just a quick sort of public service announcement that we're also working with A Better Start on a new joint round. You may already have seen some information about this, but we are really pleased to be partnering to make sure that every child has the best possible start in life, and that we will shortly be announcing a new contestable round, and the main research areas will be healthy weight, successful learning, and mental health and resilience. So please stay tuned for more information about this. Thanks everyone. Back to you, Kawati.
Kia ora whānau. To wrap us up, mā te karakia whakamutinga, kei nei tātou. Unuhia, te uru tapu nui kia wātea, kia māma, te ngākau te tinana me te wairua I te ara takatu, koi ara I rongo whakairi a kirunga, tūturu o whiti whakamaua kia tīna, haumi huie, tāi kia. Kia ora everybody, go well. See you next time.